Night on News Radio 560 KPQ and KPQ.com.
It's 1:31, 70 degrees outside, sunny, beautiful Friday. The weekend has already started, but I'm hard at work because I'm surrounded by scientists and people who know more about the health of the forest and the river than I do. And we're going to get to them all because if I keep moving, I think maybe we'll get it all into a half hour. We'll begin with Barbara Cabrillo, the Upper Columbia Salmon Recovery Outreach Coordinator. That's a long title, Barbara. You must admit, that's a long title.
Hi, Michael. Yes, it is. We're in the process of changing it now, but
something longer?
For today, yeah.
Okay. For now, please tell us about why we're talking about forest health and river health and what the work group has come to discuss.
Well, thank you for having us, Michael. We're very excited to be here. We're also very excited because we're having the 5th anniversary of the North Central Washington Forest Health Collaborative, and I have experts here today that can tell you a little bit more about that. So that's all I'll say for now.
Okay, let's start with one of the experts. Lloyd McGee is the co-chair of the North Central Washington Forest Health Collaborative, and he's the program manager at the Nature Conservancy. So my family was given to your organization, the Nature Conservancy.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's talk about what work you're doing as one of the program managers.
Okay, as working for the Nature Conservancy, we developed with partners the North Central Washington Forest Health Collaborative. And I just wanted to start by saying that, we are so fortunate, to live in such extraordinary landscapes. And from that perspective, I think we all share in the goal to restore our national forests that are locally used by all of your listeners, I'm sure, as far as whether it's recreation, hunting, fishing, just, enjoying the beauty. And so
we're not fixing it, we're restoring it. Now, that's a big job.
That's a big difference, yeah. We're restoring it. We're trying to get it back to what we call the historic range, and the historic range of where it used to be before there was so much, people intervention and so on and so forth. But it's all about active management, and we're supportive of active management as a collaborative, finding ways to reduce the forest fuels and to restore the aquatics. And I can share the vision with you if you're interested in that.
I'm sort of getting it, yeah. Mm-hmm. Let me ask one question, and that is, what did the old range look like that's so different from the one we have today? Is the forest too thick, or was it thinner then, or what did it look like?
Yeah, back before the 1930s, what the forest looked like was a lot larger diameter, large structure, less trees per acre, more open savanna grasslands underneath the larger trees. Now we have significant overstocking of our stands. We have young trees with closed canopies, and the fires that we have seen recently, the mega fires, stay in the tree tops, and that's hard to fight the fire other than from the air. Whereas if it's on the ground, if, there's enough openings between the trees, we can fight it from the ground, and it'll be much safer for all firefighters.
So the last time the forest was healthy was when the nation was bankrupt. We were in the 30s. The Great Depression was upon us, and the forest was going, beautiful. This is just how it's supposed to work. And for the rest of the nation, we were all standing in bread lines. But the forest was in great health. And did we start managing it then to make it too thick, to make it too overgrown?
One of the biggest problems that we didn't see was fire suppression. After like 1905, the law came down as regulations that all fires will be put out before 10 o'clock the next morning. Fire suppression has allowed these fuels to really grow and get thick and overstocked and really become infected with insect diseases and the things that that cause these wildfires. And so that's the challenge, is how do you reduce them through either prescribed burning or some sort of forest thinnings, and it's at a grand scale. How do we increase the pace and scale of restoration on all our national forests in north central Washington? It's a challenge.
That's a good question, though. Do you even have a partial answer? How do we restore the forest to its health?
What our collaborative is working with is we're really looking at how to bring funding and increase personnel, whether it's more hiring or even using contractors and consultants from the private sector and going out and advocating for more funding. We just got $2.2 million from Washington, D.C. for the Supplemental Hazardous Fuels Funds to do a large landscape project around Lake Wenatchee, and that is 75,000 acres. And, the public will be hearing more about that large-scale project real soon.
So you'll be clearing 75,000 acres?
Absolutely not. But
restoring is probably a better word.
Yeah, what it really
clearing
comes down
may have given you the wrong impression.
Yeah, we definitely don't want to put that out there. I mean, what we're talking about is the 75,000 acres. We're going to do a lot of analysis and planning to figure out where is appropriate treatments to reduce fuels and what would be most strategic locations that will, try to keep the fires contained and back to what was more characteristic wildfires. We'll never reduce to where there's no more fires. We have to live with fire. It will be in our landscapes long into the future. But how do we get it back to the characteristic sizes that they used to be rather than now the mega fires?
And the answer to that is a healthier forest, or a forest that is growing and thriving as it was intended to, and looking like it was intended to look.
Yes, and active management in the appropriate places.
Now, you were talking about funding. It sounds like you're going to have to hire a bunch of people to do something. What?
Yeah, one of them is the planning for that Lake Wenatchee. It's called Upper Wenatchee Pilot Project, and that funding is particularly, used for hiring contracted planning team. It's a really integrated, diverse planning team, and they will help us design what that forest could look like in the strategic thinnings, prescribed burning, aquatic work, roads, recreation, what that will look like in the near future. And we want to engage with the public to have input as often as possible.
That's Lloyd McGee, the co-chair of the North Central Washington Forest Health Collaborative. I want to focus now on another one of our guests so we get a chance for everyone to speak. Melody Grimes is the executive director of the Upper Columbia Salmon Recovery Board. And the name of that board lends me to believe that you are in the business of recovering salmon and the health of the salmon and the health of the river as well.
That's right. And you probably wonder, what are we doing in the forest? So I'll explain that real quick.
Well, they're all so connected.
That's right.
I got a lesson here once before. And
That's right. We like to say fish grow on trees in the Upper Columbia, and I'll explain that in a little bit.
I like that too.
Yeah. So our organization, we're a nonprofit organization. We coordinate implementation of the recovery plan for the spring Chinook and the steelhead. And we do that using a completely voluntary, collaborative approach. And we try to balance those ecological needs for restoring habitat for salmon with the economic and social needs of the landowners and the land managers. And then in 2012, we were asked if we couldn't use that very similar collaborative approach to look at some of these uplands. And our board agreed to do that because here in the Upper Columbia, over 70% of the land base is U.S. Forest Service managed. So we can't fully implement the recovery plan for those salmon without addressing the health on those upland lands. And so that's where we got involved in facilitating the North Central Washington Forest Health Collaborative. And again, we're doing that as a coordinator and a facilitator and trying to work with all these great partners like Cascadia Conservation District and Nature Conservancy and the tribes and the counties and the Forest Service, of course, to try to accelerate that both terrestrial and aquatic restoration.
So what do you actually do? What do you do when you restore these areas?
You mean for salmon?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we actually are the entity that serves to coordinate the funding for that. So we aren't the ones putting the projects in the ground. We have these great sponsors like Cascadia Conservation District and Cascade Columbia Fisheries Enhancement Group, Chelan County Natural Resource Department. And they are actually out there putting, wood in the streams if that's what the concern is there for habitat, or building channels on the sides for juvenile rearing. So they're putting these projects in the stream to try to get those either more healthy for juveniles to rear or for the adults to spawn there.
And you're returning these rivers and the creeks and the small tributaries to the condition that they should be in if the salmon are to continue to thrive there.
Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And you've studied them enough to know what that condition is, because in many cases their old habitat's not there anymore, right?
Right. Mm-hmm. Right.
And how are the Chinook this year? How are the steelhead? What's your forecast?
I don't have the numbers for this year. I'm sorry, I didn't bring that.
I don't need numbers. Just are they healthy?
Well,
are they getting better? Are they getting stronger?
The steelhead are doing better than the Chinook. But it's important to note that the Chinook had a lot farther to go. They are endangered under the Endangered Species Act, whereas the steelhead are only threatened.
Pretty different challenge
for the Chinook.
They're in
a lot worse condition, yeah.
They come from the sea, right?
Yes, they both do. They migrate anadromous.
But the Chinook come further? They go further out at sea?
I don't think so. No, they're both natural.
You would know. Don't
I
ask
don't
me.
know how far they go out in the ocean. They all are migrating out to the ocean and then returning here to spawn.
And can you tell right away if you've done the right work in the tributaries and the streams and the creeks when the fish arrive?
It's hard. Well, sometimes the sponsors can see the fish using the areas right away. And sometimes it's harder to know if what we're doing, is going to have effect. There's this 5 to 7 year cycle for these salmon too, so it's hard to know what you're doing for the juveniles. We won't know until they're coming back. And then ocean conditions vary too, and those have a great impact too.
Patrick, we said we were going to talk to you after the break, but let's talk to you now. At least introduce you. Patrick Haggerty is the project coordinator for the Cascadia Conservation District, and he's going to discuss the Upper Wenatchee project regarding the partner roles. You guys are all partnering. You guys are all working together and also asking other people to work with you. Am I got that right?
Yeah, you sure do. I mean, I think that's one of the incredible things about this Forest Health Collaborative is there's a huge amount of diversity in the partners that are involved in this collaborative. What is it, Lloyd, like 23 members or so right now?
Yeah, 23 member organizations since the last 5 years, and very diverse. And, it's really all about conservation, timber industry. We've got tribes and we've got local, state, and federal participation.
Because you needed everybody, right?
Yeah, but it was an invitation from the Okanagan-Wenatchee National Forest in 2013 that got us started. If it wasn't for that invitation to the communities to participate, the Forest Service acknowledging that they need help, and we acknowledge that it takes all of us to work together to get to the scale we need to get to. Yeah, so it's a very diverse group and very, very dedicated, and got a lot of experts.
So someone with the National Forest, perhaps you'll give us their name, deserves some credit for saying, look, we want to fix this thing. It's huge. It's a gigantic job. But if we had like 30 partners, maybe it would be easier. Mm-hmm. Someone?
Yeah, that certainly is part of how this all started, and Susan Thomas here is going to talk to us about that history from the Forest Service here shortly. And she's also going to talk a little bit about the Upper Wenatchee pilot project.
Well, yeah, let's talk about that. What are you doing there? I had that on the line.
So this is a new project for the Forest Service that the Forest Health Collaborative is working on as well. And it's just in its beginnings, the collaborative and the Forest Service have been working on it for a long time. All these groups coming together to talk about a vision, but certainly as it moves forward, there's going to be a lot of opportunity to discuss with the public about their vision for this landscape as well.
What does the Wenatchee face in terms of its problems that the Columbia is not facing, or some other area might not be facing?
Sure. So the primary focus of this project is to restore forest health and resiliency by reestablishing forest structure. So, Lloyd was talking about back in the early 1900s when there was more natural forest fire coming through, low-intensity fire on the landscape. There's a real mosaic patchwork across the landscape, openings and then thick patches, and so a lot of it's about restoring that, and that can be done in a lot of different ways, by mechanical thinning, through use of things like prescribed fire, through getting out there with chainsaws and limbing up trees and thinning out trees. But all of that has to be looked at by a large team of planners from the Forest Service to look at where those treatments might make sense, and then explore those options with the public before they make any decisions on what's going to happen. But
it occurs to me that if we had come here in the 1880s, we could say, well, there's Saddle Rock, but where's everything else? It's like the forest's in the wrong place. The trees aren't right. Would we notice it right away, the difference in the topography?
I think you would. There's been some incredible research by the Forest Service Research Station here, and they even contracted with the local photographer, John Marshall, who had an exhibit a couple of years ago at the museum, and he was capturing exactly that. He was recreating old photos from mid-1800s from the Forest Service record, and he went back and took pictures, over the last 20, 30 years, and it was a pretty incredible exhibit. I'm sure it'll be back, but it was pretty astounding to just look at that contrast.
That's Patrick Haggerty. He's the project coordinator for the Cascadia Conservation District. He's part of the web of partnerships that make up the discussion that we're doing today. We're going to take a quick break and get Susan Thomas, the Forest Partnership Coordinator, on the phone. She's with the Okanagan-Wenatchee National Forest, and she'll tell us about the original idea behind this extraordinary effort, and also what she's doing today. Take a quick break.
The Agenda with Michael Knight on News Radio 560 KPQ and KPQ.com.
News Radio 560 KPQ. Our time is 1:49, 70 degrees outside. The studio is full of people, scientists and people who know a lot more about the rivers and the forests around me than I do. And we're introducing yet another person who couldn't make it in person because of her busy schedule, but she's here with us. And it's Susan Thomas, the Forest Partnership Coordinator for the Okanagan-Wenatchee National Forest. Susan, are you with us?
I am, Michael. Thanks for having us.
I'm sorry that not everyone in the studio can hear you, but that's because they don't have headphones. Let's first just discuss the element of of the cooperative that the National Forest Service plays.
Yes. So as you asked earlier to Patrick, you're asking about, well, who was this that really wanted to begin this vision of the North Central Washington Forest Health Collaborative? And that would be Clint Kyle. He was our deputy forest supervisor about 6 years, and he was beginning to really see our budgets decreasing, capacity becoming more and more an issue. Meanwhile, we're having these mega fires out on the forest, coupled with insect and disease, climate change, and saying we can't handle this alone. We have 4.6 million acres, from the Canadian border down to Yakima, and just said, we need to be reaching out to partners and seeing how we can build some collaborative efforts to help work on our forest health issues. So that's when the Upper Columbia Salmon Recovery Board, and you heard from Melody, and other partners came to our door. It was this perfect timing, and to say, we'd like to work on these issues with you. So 5 years ago next week, we kicked off our first meeting up at the Mission Ridge Ski area, had about 50 people there talking all about forest health, passionate to work with us in the forest, roll up their sleeves and get to work. We couldn't really be doing this collaborative without the Upper Columbia Salmon Recovery Board. They take a role in facilitating, doing that note-taking, that day-to-day kind of thing that makes this successful. And then we have such dedicated partners that are dedicated to the health of our forests. They have a great, a voice. They're advocates, so they can go to the halls of Olympia and talk about our forest health urgency of increasing pace and scale on the forest land, but also get back to Washington, D.C. and share those same kind of concerns. But they're also partners that are willing to roll up their sleeves, sit around the table with us, and bring their expertise, their resources, their money, their capacity to really help work with these forest health issues that we have. And so I'd like to take a moment and just share one of the projects that we're starting to really just begin on. The collaborative's been working on projects up north in the Tenasket district, up in the Methow, but now we're really taking off on what we're calling the Upper Wenatchee Pilot Project. And where this began, if you all remember, back in 2015, after our devastating summer of fires that hit very close to home and also 4 fatalities up north, we hosted the Wildfire and Us Summit that we had at the Performing Arts Center. Many of the listeners might remember over 400 people attended. And we really looked at the role of fire in our forests and also how we can all be proactive as landowners, as federal agencies, to better understand, this role of fire in this landscape. And so from that Wildfires and Us Summit, Peter Goldmark, Commissioner of Public Lands at the time, said, well, I want a grassroots group of you to start putting a proposal together. What would this look like to really change the landscape and what you're talking about? So some of these collaborative members that are in the room today, along with other folks and some of us from the Forest Service, sat around a table and put a multi-million-dollar proposal together where we were looking at the Stamilt lands up outside of Wenatchee. We were looking at fire-adapted learning communities, the Chumstick Coalition, and federal lands. And thanks to the advocacy of the collaborative for 2 years, talking about this proposal, trying to find monies. We finally landed on finding monies for this proposal. So now we're just launching off on this Upper Wenatchee pilot project with the $1.6 million, and we're going to take a planning area up in that Lake Wenatchee area that was normally only going to be about 30,000 acres planned, and instead we're more than doubling that area to 75,000 acres to be treated. This is truly going to increase the pace and scale of what we're talking about that you heard from Patrick.
Can you tell me exactly what sort of treatment you're talking about?
Yeah, so what Melody said earlier on the aquatics treatment, but also will be on the timber treatments, as Patrick said. We have an overstocked forest out there, so we're really needing to thin the forest, provide more gaps, provide more forest products out to for forest products, but we're also trying to do some prescribed fire and taking what Lloyd and Patrick both shared of taking this very unsustainable forest of fire being suppressed for over 100 years and turn it more into resilient conditions.
Aren't these forests that are at stake that we're talking about, the overcrowded forests, don't they exist like from the Colorado Rockies all the way to the coast in 12 states or more? Aren't there billions of dollars worth of correction that needs to be done in all the states?
Yeah, this is an epidemic across the West. We thought we were using the best science at the time of fire suppression, but sadly this was not the best science, the best way to be managing these forests. So now across the West, we're all in this situation of an urgency of these kind of forest management. You couple this with the warming climate and decreasing budgets, and we really have a problem at hand. And this is why even more we're needing these collaborative efforts of partners all coming together for all of us to be working on this situation.
That's Susan Thomas. She's the Forest Partnership Coordinator for the Okanagan-Wenatchee National Forest. This is such a big subject that I think we need a part 2 for this sometime soon, because I think we've just scratched the surface. We've talked about the problem. We've talked about the partners. I really want to spend some time when we get together again talking about who's going to clear the damn forest, because that's where the work comes in. And yes, it's $1 billion plan, but there really isn't another plan. Mother Nature's got her own plan. And it's like, well, I'm just going to have to burn down the whole thing until you guys get this right. And that's not something that, unfortunately, all the civilization around it can sustain. So will you come back?
Oh, definitely. You're definitely right. This is a part 2 or part 3 even.
I just think it's too big to we don't get anything said, and then the half hour is gone. Maybe we'll have to do an hour on it. But thank you, Susan, and I'm going to have to say goodbye to you now because it's time to say goodbye to everyone. Friday afternoon, I got to get out of here.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Susan. We'll talk again soon. And I know the Barbara Cabrillo who put this whole thing together. All I had to do was sit here and just point to people, and they just began talking. It was fascinating. Anyway, I appreciate all the help. Let's have somebody say goodbye for the group and tell us about, in 30 seconds, what do you think the future is going to look like? What do you hope to accomplish, and when do you think we will accomplish it?
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity. I think what we need to look at in the near future is not only how are we going to treat the lands, but can we bring back forest products infrastructure? We've lost all our sawmills, and what are we going to do with the trees that do get cut? So the Nature Conservancy with other partners, we are working on trying to bring in investors that will bring back infrastructure and the right types of mills, the right scale, right size of mills that can handle what we think will be coming off the forest when we do this treatment across these landscapes.
Because if you thin the forest in 12 states, that's some wood. That is a lot of wood.
Yeah, and there's states that don't even have sawmills now, and so there is a big urgency to bring back the opportunity to pay for this restoration. This ecological restoration can be paid for with the byproduct of the wood that comes off if we do it right.
Barbara, you get the last word.
Thank you, Michael. I wanted to point you to our website, ncwfhc.org, and we also have a Facebook page. That's the North Central Washington Forest Health Collaborative. You can find some really great information if we want to dive into this subject a little further. All the listeners can go there, and there's a phone number on the website.
Barbara Cabrillo, thanks a million. Lloyd McGee, thank you very much, Melody.